energy expenditure is going to go to cellular work, involuntary work, work that you're not even aware of. Like right now, as you're sitting down, there are thousands and thousands of chemical reactions occurring within your body, some of which require energy, some of which burn energy, you're not even aware of. It's just going on inside of you. Okay? Only a third of your energy output goes to voluntary activity, okay? Like running. If you run, you're going to burn energy. Well, that really, over the course of 24 hours, only constitutes 1/3 of your energy output. It's really non-voluntary work, subconscious activity that consumes the bulk of the energy that you burn. What happens when you eat too much? That happened to me this past week. Okay? So, we take that excess glucose, okay, and we store it as glycogen. Where is glycogen stored? In what types of tissues? Not adipose. Adipose is triglycerides. Liver and skeletal muscle. That's where we store glycogen. Okay. Now, there are only so many glycogen storage sites. At some point, those storage sites become full. If we still have excess glucose, what happens to that excess glucose? It gets converted to what? Fat. And it's stored in adipose tissue. Okay? Now, of course, if we have excess fats from our diet, that's stored as adipose tissue. If we have excess protein from our diet, that's converted to fat and stored in adipose tissue. Okay? So, if we're living a good life, and we're eating too much, what's happening is all of these excess nutrients get converted to fat. Okay? In other words, we're planning for the future, maybe when we're on Naked and Afraid. Okay? We may need those fats sometime in the future.
Is that why, like, the guys that get, like, really big, if they stop working out, it, like, turns into fat, like, really quick?
What happens too with them is, a lot of that muscle undergoes atrophy, and what happens many times is they have a very high caloric intake. And when they stop working out and quit burning it, they continue to take a relatively high caloric intake and they get fat. In fact, metabolism, once you start slowing down, your metabolism slows down. So if you could eat if you eat the same amount of caloric intake, you're not going to burn it as fast. Yeah.
Okay, so with anorexic, like the people, like I know, like does that happen? I know, like does it happen like slowly as they lose their muscle mass, or can it happen like really, really fast?
That generally happens slowly.
Okay, so like first they start losing weight, and then like overall they start losing muscle mass.
Yes, they start losing muscle mass, and they start, and it has a negative impact upon all the different tissues and cells. And so it has an adverse effect on their metabolism. They're at increased risk, for instance, for cardiac arrhythmias, sudden death.
Right.
They're just poor souls. What happens when you don't eat enough? Okay, this brings us back to Naked and Afraid. Okay? When they put you out there in the middle of Costa Rica, in the middle of the rainforest, they don't give you like a steak or some potatoes to carry with you. You're on your own. Okay? You're out there. Maybe there's a few steaks. But like, who wants to tangle with them?
I was like flipping through it, and the girl was like, "Yeah, I haven't cooked in like a week." Or 2 weeks. And I was just like, "Oh my God."
I find it fascinating. Okay, so you're not eating anything. So what do you first draw upon as a source of fuel? Glycogen. Yeah. And the problem, though, is that those glycogen reserves that are present within the liver and skeletal muscle, they may last you 12 hours. If you're lucky, they last up to 24 hours. But there's a limit to those glycogen reserves. Yeah. And so then your body starts to metabolize fats. Okay? In fact, what glucose you still have available from any available glycogen breakdown, glycogenolysis, that's what we call the breakdown of glycogen, that glucose is going to be reserved for red blood cells in the brain. Okay? In the meantime, we start breaking down fats. And the fatty acids can be used by other cells or tissues. After about a day, we will slowly start to begin breaking down protein as well. Okay? Now, it takes about 24 hours for the brain to adapt and start using a form of fuel called ketones. We'll talk about how ketones are generated in a little bit. But once you begin to undergo ketosis, once your body starts producing these ketones, then your metabolism slows down. So you lose energy. If you look at Naked and Afraid, after a couple of days, people are just lying down all day. They have no energy. They're in ketosis. Yes?
So you can find ketones in your urine, right?
Only if you're breaking down fat.
Okay, can that be a sign to tell if you have diabetes?
You can find ketones in diabetes, but it doesn't mean you have diabetes. I'll give you an example. Let's go back to that Sugar Busters diet. Okay, when you limit your carbohydrate intake, it forces your body to break down fat. When you break down fat into fatty acids, your liver's going to take some of those fatty acids and convert them into ketones, releasing them into the bloodstream. And those ketones will be filtered freely into the urine. That doesn't mean you have diabetes. It tells me you're breaking down fat. In fact, people on the Sugar Busters or Atkins diet, in order to determine whether they're restricting their carbs enough, they'll get a little bottle of keto sticks. This is a little dipstick that you can pee onto. It's got a little color indicator. And so if there are ketones in your urine telling you that your body's in ketosis, this color indicator changes color. Okay? So that if you're on that diet and you pee onto a stick and there's no change in color, it tells you you have to restrict your carbs even more because you're not generating ketosis. Okay. Right. So what happens when we fast? Well, we said the first thing that happens is the glycogen that's stored in the liver and skeletal muscle undergoes breakdown. We call it glycogenolysis. Okay? And the glucose that's produced is preferentially used by the brain and nervous system, while other cells begin to use fatty acids, which in the absence of any carbohydrate intake, these fatty acids are derived from triglycerides and adipose tissue. Remember that almost all the tissues can use fat if needed, except for the brain and red blood cells. Okay. Now, what if this fast, so to speak, continues beyond glycogen depletion, beyond that 12 to 24-hour period? Well, then we begin to break down fat and protein. Okay? We said that when we break down protein, we form amino acids which are then deaminated, and nitrogen appears in the urine. Okay? So you start to see more nitrates in the urine, which are simply derived from the amino groups of the amino acids. These amino acids then, many of the amino acids after they undergo deamination can be converted into glucose. That process is called gluconeogenesis, when you convert again a non-glucose molecule into glucose. And if you generate glucose from protein, it's going to be used preferentially by the brain. Any leftover can be used by other cells. Okay? Some of the proteins can be converted to ketones, but most of the ketones that we generate in a starvation state are going to come from fatty acids. So at the same time we're breaking down protein, we've already begun to break down fat into fatty acids, and some of these fatty acids are going to be converted to ketones. Now, over a 24-hour period or a 36-hour period of fasting, the brain adapts, and over that period of time, it can convert to ketone use as a source of fuel. Okay? And then other cells can also use ketones. Let's look how ketones are formed. In a fasting state or starvation state, adipose tissue is breaking down fat. We call this lipolysis. So in doing so, we're releasing free fatty acids into the bloodstream. Okay? Now, all of the tissues are capable of breaking down those fatty acids into 2 carbon fragments and attaching them to coenzyme A. The liver is a little bit more efficient than most tissues, but look here. These fatty acids can be picked up by extrahepatic tissue, okay? Then we can form acetyl coenzyme A, okay? By just taking those fragments, adding them to coenzyme A, we form acetyl coenzyme A. And those tissues can then shunt that into the Krebs cycle to generate energy, okay? The liver is much more efficient in terms of metabolizing fatty acids. It can convert those fatty acids into acetyl coenzyme A, which it can use itself as a source of energy, or it can condense some of these molecules of acetyl coenzyme A into slightly larger molecules called ketones, which are released into the bloodstream. Now, when these ketones are released into the bloodstream, they can be excreted through the urine, or some of them are excreted through respiration. For instance, acetone is a ketone. And so people in ketosis exhale acetone, which has a fruity odor. So they have a fruity odor on their breath. These ketones, though, are much more rapidly picked up by extrahepatic tissue, and they can be converted to acetyl coenzyme A and used as a source of energy. So this is what happens in the brain. So whereas fatty acids can be picked up rapidly by the liver, not so much by extrahepatic tissue. This isn't a very efficient use of fatty acids. But if the liver converts those fatty acids to ketones, then they're much more readily used as a source of fuel by other cells.
Dr. Kurt, it's not the same acetone as like the milk, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Okay, the basal metabolic rate is the rate at which the body spends energy for its maintenance. This is the work that goes on without conscious awareness. For instance, the beating of the heart, activities involved in digestion. Any energy expenditures above that basal layer, above the basal metabolic rate, are used to fuel voluntary activities. Okay? If you add the two, basal metabolism plus voluntary work, total energy needs are about 2,000 kilocalories per day. Now, when we say calories, we really mean kilocalories. Okay. We spend 2/3 of that, about 1,200 to 1,400 kilocalories a day, just simply to support metabolism, the basal metabolic rate. If someone has hypothyroidism, what happens to that basal metabolic rate in the face of hypothyroidism? It slows down. So we don't burn calories as rapidly. We may take in calories normally, but we don't burn them normally. So what happens to us?
Gain weight.
We gain weight, yeah. Okay. Now, when we take in carbs in our diet, which is the main fuel used by most tissues, the carbs are broken down within the bloodstream into monosaccharides, glucose and fructose and lactose, but mainly glucose. And glucose enters into the bloodstream. Okay? What regulates glucose levels and glucose metabolism are two hormones, insulin and glucagon. Insulin is a hormone produced by the beta cells of the pancreas, that's the islets of Langerhans, whereas glucagon is produced by the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans. And insulin and glucagon are your yin and yang. They're kind of antagonists, okay, in terms of glucose metabolism. They do the opposite. So generally, when insulin levels are high, glucagon levels are low, and vice versa. Okay? Now, glucose enters most cells from the bloodstream via facilitated transport. In other words, there's a transport protein available that can ferry the glucose across the cell membrane, because glucose is a polar molecule, and so it needs some help. Remember that cell membranes are non-polar. They're lipophilic. Okay? But these transmembrane proteins that carry glucose across, okay, they have to be phosphorylated before they open up to allow glucose to pass in to the cell. Okay? Phosphorylation involves a chemical reaction that's triggered by the binding of the insulin receptors on that cell membrane. So, what happens is that when glucose enters into the bloodstream, okay, that increased concentration of glucose within the blood triggers release of insulin from the beta cells of the pancreas. Insulin then binds to insulin receptors on the surface of cells. It, in a sense, activates those transmembrane proteins so that it facilitates then the entry of glucose, the transport of glucose from the bloodstream into cells. Now, inside of cells, insulin facilitates the breakdown, the metabolism of that glucose to meet the immediate energy needs of that cell. Okay? So we say insulin enhances the fusion of glucose into tissues, and then within the tissues, it enhances the breakdown, in CO2 and water and ATP. Now, any glucose in excess of the immediate needs of the cell, what happens? Well, insulin's going to facilitate its conversion to glycogen. And we said that once that glycogen, those glycogen stores are full, insulin favors conversion of glucose to fat. Okay. So people who take large doses of insulin oftentimes gain weight on the insulin because it's lipogenic, it tends to form fat. Now, insulin also favors transport of amino acids into cells for protein synthesis. So those are kind of the activities of insulin. What insulin does. So after we eat a meal in our